to Directorpiece Theater.
Open up! It's the police!
I have to go.
Hey, you know
You're
what
just you're just horny for cameras. It
well,
sounds like.
speaking of horny for anything, this movie that you want to talk
let's
about.
oh yeah, sexy movie.
Let me tell you, the one thing that was like a little bit of a bummer about this when I was watching it was like I just was coveting the outdoor space so much. I was like, oh yeah, I know they're in danger, but man, they're in all these big giant open spaces. That just looks great.
It's so cool.
It looks so
right?
great. Oh yeah.
When did you see this movie?
When it came out, I watched it right in the theater, I believe, or right after it came out on Blu-ray, one of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And I just watched it again literally today, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Hell yeah!
This is a great movie. Like this is it wasn't up for any of the awards, but it really should have been because I feel like for a horror movie, this is
it goes above and beyond.
This is an art piece. Yeah, this is an art piece of a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not that many of those. And also, it it has like the audacity to be a pretty clear metaphor that still works. You know what I mean? Like that's surprising in and of itself.
In horror, that's hard to do because it's so.
Yeah, and we've started to get kind of excited about that as a thing in contemporary cinema.
Recently.
Yeah, like Parasite is an example, or Get Out, or whatever. And like this movie's not about those issues, but like it is a conversation about a social issue disguised as a horror film, right? Like, do you agree with that? Yeah, I think so. And I don't
think it's trying to say anything crazy about it, but
that's true. It's not controversial.
It's connecting dots in a unique way, an interesting way, which is kind of all we need for a horror movie. So there you go.
Way more than we need. Way more. Yeah.
Just if you can't read, we're talking about It Follows, 2014, supernatural horror film.
Yeah, we were really
written
pumped
and directed by David Robert Mitchell. What were we really pumped about?
We were really pumped about this at Cracked. I remember this was like people were pretty excited about it. Yeah. I remember like when we were shooting stuff that year, we were talking about it on set a bunch. Like it was one of those like that is a movie. Holy shit!
I loved it, and I walked away, and I was like, when I walked away, I saw it with Swaim at Vista. I think I saw it at the Vista, and I was like, how much was that? How much was that? Did it take to make that movie? And I looked online and found the answer, and I'll tell it to y'all right now.
I'm excited. Yeah,
$2 million. $2 million to make this movie. That is so good. That is so good. Perfect. It made $23 million. Not as much as you'd expect. In fact, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who haven't seen this movie. Go get a copy of it, because listen to what I'm going to say, because it's my time. It's Abe's time.
It is the hour of Abe is nigh.
It's a cool 100 minutes. If you like horror movies, it's one of the best of the last decade. I'm going to tell you some cool stuff about it, but like, go see it, man.
I mean, it must have made more money in streams and DVD purchases that we haven't. Right? I feel like it's got at least that going for it.
It's a cult hit, that's for sure. But I just think that it doesn't have that wide of a grasp, you know?
No, which is a shame because, when I watched it, that's what you said is exactly what I thought. I'm like, that's the best horror movie I've seen in a very, very long time.
It's because there's no big names in it.
No, there aren't.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I believe Micah Monroe, Jay,
right?
She's been in a bunch of other stuff, including The Guest, which, you know, I'm a big fan about that.
Yeah.
But she was in Independence Day, the new one, the newer version.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah.
Of course. So she's gotten a few other roles, but she's done some horror movies, and she's really good in this. She knocks it out of the park.
Yeah.
But today I want to talk about camera. I want to talk actually about a broader conception that I think is really freeing for anyone who has artistic endeavors.
Yeah.
Rarely do we really talk about in this podcast. Like, we usually try to frame it to the specific and more useful, or like, here's what our particular interests are. And, you know, Adam and I are being directors. looking at that craft from, that kind of craftsmanship kind of inspection, like here's what it means to direct or be a cinematographer. And this is, I kind of want to do something larger with this podcast this time.
Ooh.
Which is I want to talk about if you're just like someone who just likes to, doodle, or if you're someone who wants to break into an industry of some kind that's relatively art-based. I want to talk about this concept and the intelligence behind the concept, because it's kind of the soundbite wisdom that you get, that especially when you're younger, or not necessarily like younger, but like just like more new to a craft, you kind of, it doesn't feel that helpful. And what that is the concept of limiting yourself into creativity. In fine arts school, and I've been to too many of them, they kind of slam into your brain this idea about limitations being opportunities.
Yep.
And so younger, greener directors, like I was saying, get frustrated by this because you want nothing more than to use all the tools and the toys that you have when you're at a, film school or an art school or photography classes or whatnot. Or in the case of you get money and you're making your first web series or your first feature film, you have all these tools, use the toys. That's so great. But as you get older, you realize that movies aren't really at their best when they're doing everything. I think that seems pretty self-evident. I think I want to make the argument that things that we usually walk away from and say, wow, that they did some great stuff there. They're usually at the best when they take one very specific thing or a small group of things, and they do that extremely well.
Yep. That's totally true. By the way, in film school, they love
music,
this.
Bands, in film school, they love to do this.
They love pointing out this. There's a fact I've heard more than once in a film school class. They're like, Steven Spielberg started with an entire shark. And then it fell apart on day one. And guess what? Jaws is better without the shark.
So cool.
I'm like, all right.
So cool. It's
all
right.
They love it. All right, we get it. No
you
shark. I understand. I don't get a shark.
You make the hand gesture like
as
you're
for
jerking
shark, I don't
yourself
get
off.
one. I get it.
Yeah. And they do that. And it's because there's some truth behind it. And no one ever sat me down and said, hey, Abe, listen, you stupid fucking fucker.
They didn't start with that. No.
They never did that. No one ever did that and said, this is what I mean when I say limitations are opportunities.
Right.
Directors often find themselves working with limitations and a necessity, like I'm saying, but every now and then they impose a limitation on themselves in order to give a picture its uniqueness. And a well-known example of this is lens choice, i.e. what focal length, what lens you're going to use for the movie. For the unacclimated, lens length is the measurement of the field of view of the shot. So a higher number means more telephoto or more zoomed in, and a wider angle is the lower number. Cinema typically plays wide. We talked about this all the time in this podcast.
We love this.
Simple stuff.
Yep.
Here's some films. I did some research. Here's some films that use only one lens for the entire film.
I love the shit out of this because everyone needs to know this is not a thing everybody used to do, but it's definitely in vogue now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in vogue now. It used to be you used a pretty wide range of lenses. Like that was pretty standard in movies. Now it's becoming like you want a cool look, pick a lens and just that's the movie.
That's all.
That's
shoot
the
your
movie.
whole movie on it, baby.
Yeah. By the way,
I'm like,
I tried that. I tried it at Cracked. I like rom.com, especially in season 2. I was like, we are going to be on a 25. Like that's the movie. Everything's a 25. And I kind of liked it. And I also kind of was like, why? At the end, but not to shit on it.
It's even crazier, and someone who's not on the list because he's not really as well known. I believe it's Ozu, or it could be Oshima. I forget. I didn't do the research on this because he's not as well known. A Japanese filmmaker.
Yeah.
Used one lens for their entire life of making movies. Dead serious. They used a 50 for everything.
Yeah.
I think it's Ozu. I think Ozu used a 50 for everything.
What a milquetoast lens, though, to live on. The 50. You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean,
Alfred Hitchcock disagrees, my friend.
Right. That's but again, it's the kind of lens that's like it's not a bold lens choice. Like you don't feel that choice that much.
in the 35 millimeter format, it has been said often by a lot of cinematographers and people who look at frames and lenses all the time. They say that 50 millimeter seems to be the one that most aptly describes human vision.
Oh.
Like when you're focusing on something.
Oh.
Like if you're looking at something in middle distance, like, 6-7 feet away from me right now is my door, and I'm going to look at my door. And the proponents of like how my brain is interpreting depth of field, like the edges of frame in terms of what I can focus on. And then when it starts becoming like peripheral vision,
right.
They say 50 is the number.
That's interesting.
But that's just, I think that's a lot of psychology going into that. And I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. It's just something some people say.
I propose coming over to your house, and I also look at your door to see if this is
look at my door.
I kind of remember it, but I didn't see it.
Let me do the list.
All right, do it. All right, go ahead.
All right, because I think people will find this interesting.
All right. I know, they will. Yeah.
The Wrestler was shot on a 12 millimeter lens.
Love that movie.
It's actually... It sucks to start that one with with this list entry because they shot on a Super 16 format.
Yeah.
So that means that the lens, the focal length is slightly different than the rest in this list, but that's like more or less 12 millimeters, which is really wide, the widest on this list. And then going into increasing more telephoto lenses, Birdman was shot on an 18 millimeter lens.
Yeah. You really feel that one. You feel that one.
You feel that one.
Yeah.
Same lens. Shot many years before. Orson Welles' Touch of Evil was also shot on an 18 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
The first feature of Wes Anderson, Bottle Rocket, was shot on a 27 millimeter, which I would argue is he played a lot with. He plays in that middle kind of 27, 35, 40.
Yeah.
That's almost all of his stuff too. You can notice that one. But he does do some telephoto work.
I was surprised that he was doing this early in his career.
Oh yeah, he actually went in the opposite direction because he wanted to flatten his spaces. But that's for a different podcast.
It is, yeah, definitely.
The Last Picture Show was shot on a 28 millimeter. Recently, I think 2017, or don't quote me on that, The Witch was shot on a 32 millimeter. Chinatown was shot on 40 millimeter. Royal Tenenbaums, the other on the list that's Wes Anderson, was shot on a 40. So he shot on a 27, and he's gotten kind of more telephoto as time has gone on, because the other one, Rushmore, was all shot on a 40 millimeter. So he noticed that, Wes Anderson likes this trick a lot.
He pivoted to it.
He's shot many movies on single lenses.
Yeah.
And he loves that 40. And I think that that's kind of what he's come to. I don't know if that's what he shot, Fantastic Mr. Fox and, all those on. I don't think so.
But
it didn't come up when I was doing my research.
You wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's not a lot of 40 in those. The Godfather, surprisingly. I was surprised by this.
That's very surprising.
Also shot on a 40.
Huh.
And, of course, bringing in the 50, Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock.
Now, even in the shower stuff... Even that's all on a 50?
They just brought it real close.
Wow, I gotta watch that again because that seems impossible. But I believe you because it's here on this list, and you looked at it.
It's here on this list,
and I didn't.
So therefore, it's infallible.
Yeah.
No. So that's just an exercise in showing you that there's no discernible. One could argue qualitative assessment, but that's less interesting. But directors of all types, with making completely different movies for many different reasons, choose to sometimes do this tactic. It follows as a film that doesn't choose one lens. I did a little switcheroo. We're not talking about movies that shoot on only one lens length. But it does actually do mostly 18 millimeter. That is just happenstance. However, I want to focus on something in this particular podcast, which is that it uses one particular tactic throughout a lot of the disciplines in making films that you may not have noticed, and it does it exclusively. And just to kind of run through that, all camera motion is kind of rigged to move at one speed. The world is a lot of static shots. If you watch this movie, camera will often not move at all, or when it does move, it moves, it creeps.
Yeah,
I think that's the word I agree with.
Yeah.
The shots, when they pan or tilt, they creep to follow characters. There's a few steady cams. There's even a handheld camera.
There's
at one point.
Yeah.
But when the camera pans and tilts, I think intentionally done by the filmmakers, it always is one speed.
It's also
and this is
not always motivated, which is a thing you almost never see.
Yes.
I know you want to talk about that, but that's like the fact that it's one constant speed and not motivated by the movement of a character is the eeriest thing about the movie.
Yeah, people run out of frame and back into frame.
Yeah.
Usually, if you have a subject, you focus will follow if they wouldn't go out of frame. We're trying to keep them in frame. No, it does that for a very specific reason. My argument is that it disregards that convention because it follows camera is a force of nature that doesn't obey the characters' stories.
Right.
Much like its villain, it moves at a constant speed, regardless of its victim's motions. It's like thematically intertwined with the monster. And I also think that visually, from just like, for the reasons just like visually to my eyes, it's captivating to watch. I like it. It's new. It's fresh. I hadn't seen it before.
Yep.
So I highly recommend it. And, to me, there's a few things that they did to make sure of this, and I want to kind of go into why and how they did those things.
That robotic zoom thing, which this movie does all the time, is it's actually it's a thing that we saw a little more of in the 70s. It's not in films as much anymore. Yeah, the servo zoom, right? And like now when we see zooms, we kind of, I mean, at least in like the last 15 years. They've kind of either been like the Office-y pump zooms, or they've been like the Tarantino like drama zoom, right? Like the kung fu zoom,
that's
basically.
Kind of, yeah. Like you're talking about like the Django one where it zooms in on.
Well, he does that all the time.
Like Leonardo.
Yeah. He loves that
because it comes from the 70s, and if you remember like Easy Rider, you remember Robert Altman,
right?
There
he
you
loves
go,
that
baby.
too. Yep.
Yeah. Although there's a lot of Robert Altman in this movie, actually.
Altman does some servo stuff. He kind of does a little bit of both. Yeah, so I mean that's just to like give people a little bit of like historical context for like this zoom thing that happens in this movie. I know it does it like when you think about it, you're like, yeah, sure, there's zoom in a movie. Yeah, there really isn't zoom in movies like this anymore. You know, like
it's
this
because it was
unique.
developed at that time in the 70s,
right? It's
60s,
a new tool,
70s,
right?
It was a new tool, new technology, so they used it. Much like we used, the tools that have been
CG.
invented recently.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly right. Let's talk about the lensing of this film.
Oh, you know it. I'm ready.
Oh, I love it. We're already talking about lenses. So I want to, if you've seen the film, remember, I'm going to describe the first shot. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. The first shot of the film is a static shot of a street, nothing in it other than the car's suburban street. It's a wide angle lens. I believe it's an 18. It drifts to the right as a woman runs out of her house, like a teenage girl. We do almost a 360. We do like a 270-degree pivot around a static point. Like the camera does not move. It just pans around in a circle until we return to the house. And then it continues and follows her to her car. The whole time she is freaking out because we don't know why she's terrified because we don't see anything, but she's acting like there's something real close to her and she is dodging things more or less. She's looking at something very specifically and running away from it. The camera does not move. So in this movie, what the movie is basically about is the concept of a sexually transmitted haunting. There's a demon or like the sex monster.
Yeah.
It. And what it does is it moves at a basic speed. It is invisible to everyone in the world except the person who it is following. And that person is the person it follows is the last person who had sex with the person who it was following before. So if you get killed, it then bounces back to whoever you had sex with before who gave it to you, or whatnot. And so it just is this like pay it forward. It's kind of a lot of people pointing out that it has a lot of people talked about like AIDS or HIV. People just talk about STDs in general, but it's also like kind of a coming of age and, finding oneself kind of movie, like most horror movies are when they deal with a group of teens. So it has that whole, like, it's like throw a wrench in that gear. And I think it's kind of effective. The basic idea is that she gets it from a guy. And she's told, like, look, he like ties her up in a warehouse and says, look, there's this monster that's going to follow you. It doesn't matter. It never sleeps. It just keeps following. You can drive away, but it's eventually going to get to you. So you got to have like your head on a swivel, and you got to be smart about this. Bye. And he's just an asshole.
Yeah, that was a really troubling element that didn't strike me as hard in 2014 as it did this time. Where it was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's really fucked up.
Yeah, he like chloroforms her and ties her up, and they kind of just move on from that. It's like,
what's
whoa.
really fucked up is the people that for the next 2 acts of the movie, who you're like getting to know. Yeah, they're like, okay, well, the only thing we know that works, like, they give it to each other. Right. One guy actually gives it to like prostitutes. Like, they're gaming the system. And they're not thinking ethically.
It was a little vague.
Like, I just don't want to die. It's pretty fucked up.
It was a little vague about whether he actually did give it to a prostitute. He definitely drove by, and it was like,
I think he did.
Shit, yeah.
I think it's absolutely buying time.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that would probably buy them a fair bit of time, one presumes, right?
Yeah, there's a lot you don't see in this movie, but that's neither here nor there.
It is neither here nor there, sorry.
That is an interesting aspect, the ethics of It Follows.
Yeah.
But, like, that's the stage is set. So according to the DP of It Follows, I found an interview with him, and he said, quote, we chose a set of Cooke S4s, very nice lenses. And we had an Angenieux 24 to 290 millimeter, which is the one that you were talking about with the servo lens, and an Allura 14.5 millimeter to 45 millimeter. So pretty wide range, but that's only like that's like 2 zoom lenses and like a handful of primes. And then anyway, back to his quote. I would say maybe 80% of the film was shot on the Cooke 18 millimeter. I think we only used primes higher than 50 millimeter once. The goal was to use the wide frame as a way to create tension. I think that's great. Yeah. I think that is a wonderful thing to say in an interview, because it doesn't tell me too much. It tells me what the tools are, but it's all about the goal was to use the wide frame as a way to create tension. So in my thought, director David Robert Mitchell and cinematographer Mike Jolicki's is saying that they wanted to capture a large field of view so that you, the viewer, could kind of see all around the characters. I think this is because they wanted to create a sense of this inevitable threat coming from anywhere. That's why they chose places that were usually populated, like college dorm spaces and quads and suburban streets. It's a slow and steady creep. And that's the part that's threatening. The fear doesn't come from the agility of the monster. It comes from the relentlessness of the monster.
Yeah, the inevitability of it. Yeah, I agree. Can I ask you, this is the moment where I feel like this is actually a worthwhile tangent because of the filmmaking piece. Did they talk about whether, like, what they were doing to control the light in this movie, in these big wides? Was it nothing? Was it very little?
I assume, I can tell just from my eye that they had bounce boards and stuff, and they used silks.
Right. Yeah.
What do you mean? Were you thinking
I'm thinking of all those 360 shots, right? So like the last time
there's not much you can do on those 360 shots.
Exactly. Unless you're Batman, right? Like, so Batman spends hours and hours and hours like doing all kinds of insane lighting control in order to get to the point where they can shoot a 360. This is a movie with a $2 million budget, and they shoot more 360s. So, like, are they just not they're not really caring about controlling the light? That's my question.
Yeah, they shot on overcast days to give them kind of a, diffuse
a softer
lighting,
which it did have. Yeah. I think they mentioned this was in Michigan. That's where this takes place, like near Detroit.
I believe so, yeah.
Because they mentioned 8 Mile. So that means that they picked a time of year so that they didn't have to control the light, I assume. Right?
Mhm.
Like, so it's like, oh, we're going to shoot in like March or whatever when it's like not snowy, but it's soft
a high
light out.
percentage of days where there's, you go out and it's like, oh, we got a few hours to shoot today where it's going to be overcast.
Yeah. Now, see, I'm asking this because in order to achieve an effect like this, from a filmmaking standpoint, you have to decide like how much control you're willing to give up to do a shot like this. Right? Like, I mean, that's sort of, you're talking about limitations, and like one of the things you have to live with a limitation is, and then you don't get to do these other fancy things that control the shot. That's what a limitation is. And to shoot 360, the big problem becomes hiding all your crew, and also you have to see literally everything, and you have to be able to light literally everything, or live with, this is just how it looks without lighting anything.
Yeah, I mean, like control, there's many different avenues to control, right?
Right.
So like something people talk about a lot is golden hour, blue hour.
Yep. Magic hour.
And those are two different parts of the day. Yeah, magic hour, two different parts of the day that the light looks a certain way. And they're known because, as we all know, they're amazing. They look amazing, but they're over in 20 minutes.
Yep.
And so if you shoot something during that time, it looks amazing. I've shot during those times, and you don't need to light them if that's what you're going for.
Right.
So it's twofold. It's control in the sense that you know what you're going to get, and you don't need to supplement it with other stuff, because limitations are once again your friend.
Yep.
Because you chose the right answer. You thought smart. You didn't work hard.
I thought they achieved a really great looking film given this tactic and that budget. Like, it looks very good, which I'm surprised by given this. Anyway, wanted to take that tangent.
Wide shots, they did very little. I think there's some bounce board work and stuff, but they're not bringing in a 5-ton truck out with John Toll's 60-foot silks for every shot.
You just
like
couldn't make
Braveheart.
this. You couldn't make this movie that way.
No.
Yeah.
It's not happening.
No, I agree. Okay.
And the budget says it didn't happen. But it still looks amazing. Yes.
Thank you for tolerating my tangent. I appreciate it.
No. I think that's kind of goes into the limitation thing, but by showing the wide suburban streets, and like later in the film there's like wide open beaches, places that seem safe because there's usually people around.
Right.
If you aren't watching closely, one of the people will catch you off guard and kill you. So I think that's the intelligence of the lens. That's the motivation for they're actually putting a character into the lens. They're saying the camera behaves in a way, and what are those rules? And by sticking to that kind of limitation, or just saying, I'm only going to use like an 18 millimeter most of the time, I'm always going to operate at this speed, they're starting to form a system here. And that's, me, I'm big into systems.
You're a system boy. I love it.
It's because all the best stuff has it. Static camera, I want to talk about that just a little bit more. The film is mostly static and unmoving overall, not just talking about the camera, but like we talk about a little bit, very limited handheld. I think it's only like one scene. Steadicam is only like a handful of shots. And when it does it, it still, even when they use motion, it maintains composition. That's the important part of how they use Steadicam. So even though it is technically moving, because it's usually like on the people's backs or in front of them as they walk and talk, you don't feel the footprint of motion in that shot, because what it does is it allows you to kind of maintain that composition and nothing's changing. Like, no, it's not. It's got one person on left, one person on the right, and they're walking. And then by the end of the shot, it's still one person on the left, one person on the right in basically the same area. So even though there is motion in it, he's playing down that motion. So every time he uses Steadicam in this movie, I find it's funny because he's doing it out of necessity of like, I have to get them from here to here.
Yes.
He's not using Steadicam as like a filmmaking tool in the way that like you mentioned a few episodes ago, Chris Nolan does, where it's like this choreographed move that shows like motion through like foreground, background, all these things are happening to distract us and make a beautiful kind of like dance that we see. He's not doing any of that stuff.
No,
he didn't even have the extras to do that, so he just did.
His Steadicam.
I think that's pretty smart.
His Steadicam feels like one of the rare moments where this movie gets conventional. You know, and it's almost like, oh man, a Steadicam, which normally the Steadicam's like, here we go, baby, right? In a movie, because you feel like here comes a sexy shot. It's the opposite in this movie. Which is saying something. He
it's like, I want to keep my camera stationary, but I can't because people are moving. Well, what's the best way that I can keep it feeling like it's stationary? Well, maintain the same distance from your subject. Try not to change the background. Don't block them so that they're moving a lot and there's people behind them and there's a lot of changes in background. Like, you're doing things to intentionally make it static at this point.
Yep.
And I think that this has an actual psychological effect on the viewer because it gives you that open space, and the fact that it's static more or less in terms of its compositions gives the viewer the ability to scan around the frame, because you become uninterested a little bit because it hangs so long. That's another thing we'll talk about, is editing gives you time to breathe, where you're like, okay, I'm seeing their faces and they're talking, and well, what's over in the left? And I know I'm supposed to be scared of, like, at any time a monster could come out. So you kind of play this Where's Waldo game with the monster in your head. Every single person who's seen this movie has done this. I think static is both a great choice for giving us this meditative pace and being able to take in all these terrifying shots, because it reminds us that just because the shot isn't moving erratically, like a lot of horror films do, notably like slasher films, they rely on speedy editing. Quote unquote, it can still inhabit any part of the frame. So we're entirely reliant on what our main character can see, even if her friends can't see the monster. That's a super good hack to me. Okay, here's my system. This is why it's terrifying, because I'm going to make you play this little game where you're looking around. And that's what he's doing several things at one point, or at all times, but static camera is just one of them.
Right.
Another thing he does, which I kind of touched on, but like to get more into it, is camera motion, which is the limitations really start to shine here. There's a typical shot that comes up many times in the film, much like the first shot of the film. It happens again when Jay, our main character, sees the monster for the second time at school. An old woman is walking across the quad as she stares from her seat in class through a window. The camera pivots. It doesn't really move in space. If it does, because I did notice that there is a little bit of it actually kind of slides out. It's trying to hide it, which once again is a nod to me by the director saying like, I had to do this for X, Y, or Z reasons, but I'm trying to make you not feel it. When you watch this film, pay attention to these large panning shots, because they typically wrap around. They're all the same. They typically go around 270 to 360 degrees, and they prime us to scan the frame, like I was saying. And horror films today, I want to point out, think of Netflix's Haunting at Hill House or the Conjuring franchise. Most of the jump scares in modern horror is about limiting the field of view using claustrophobic frames. Usually the monster invades the frame, so they pop into the field of view. It Follows is very different. This movie never shows the monster walking into frame. Usually we cut to a wide and they're already walking within it. The scare, the horror, it's not contingent on the motion of the monster. It's based on paranoia. And when you're paranoid, you're looking everywhere. And that's what the director is doing to you, the audience, making you look everywhere.
Yep. It's also kind of the genius of this convention, because the reason that films often have to get claustrophobic or do rapid editing is because if you saw the actual monster or the killer or whatever in like a really nice big wide of it, you might not be scared of it. You know what I mean? Like for instance, we did The Descent on this podcast, and they have to really cut around those cave goblins. Like, they really have to do that.
Right.
Because they don't look that great.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas the director here's like, look, what's scary is not even what this thing looks like. It's what they're doing. Like, it's literally just the behavior that's scary. And you don't even see the same thing every time. In fact, I was having a hard time figuring out what the thread of each person that appears is. Like, what the narrative thread. I'm not sure there is one. Like
There isn't, I don't think. Or I didn't find one.
catch it. So it literally means what's scary about this monster is not where is it? I mean, it is where is it? But it's like, what is it doing? And it's not trying to obscure itself. That's very creative. You know, it lets them do this really interesting way of doing horror, which is you're just watching it happen very slowly. It's great.
Right. It's inevitable and it's inscrutable.
Yes.
You don't understand it.
Yes.
And it's coming for you. That's what's scary.
Yes. The Shining is literally the only other horror movie I've ever seen that did horror this way. Like The Shining did it a little bit.
That's a good call. Yeah, they did. There's a few common tricks here.
Yes.
Another trope of modern horror I want to talk about is distance. We don't really talk about it much because it's usually not relevant when it comes to monsters. If a monster is suddenly upon you and, you know, ripping out your throat, distance is kind of irrelevant. It's close. You know, it follows, chooses to do a completely different thing. So our DP basically said in the same interview, quote, another big part was trying not to cheat perspective in terms of distance. If a person is 100 feet away, rather than punching in on a 200 millimeter lens, and now that person fills the whole frame, the idea was to keep them a small dot in the wide frame and have the movement from a realistic perspective create suspense. We do break that rule a couple of times, but for the most part, we try to adhere to that. I think that's, once again, the DPB very, very humble, but also showing us exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, also this is like crack for DPs, right? It's like the best DPs that I've heard are not the ones that are like, I'm gonna make this shot look so sexy. Like, there are guys who are like, okay, we have this rule and this rule. All right, we're going to figure out how to do this. Like, they get really excited by this idea.
Oh, it's thematically involved.
That's what they get excited about.
It's creative. Yeah.
Right. Like I haven't heard that much of Roger Deakins talking. Like, mostly I've heard him talk about qualities of light, not about narrative storytelling. But I imagine that even those great cinematographers that do get these sexy, incredible images are more interested in like limitations and like, here,
of course,
this is the kind of movie we're telling. Then like,
well, they're more interested in like, how am I with a lens and through my art telling a story?
Correct.
Of course, everyone, producer is going to be like, my favorite part of the job is when I get creatively involved.
It's true, but being a commercial DP, for instance, or like, I mean, even like an indie filmmaker, you might not have that point of view. You know what I mean? You might be more like, I'm going to make this look so great. And like, that's not actually that important. It's just what you're saying, and I'm just underlining it. You know?
No, yeah, absolutely. I like that they found a thing where they're like, yeah, it's a small dot in a wide frame. That's not exactly something you see a lot in movies, but we like it. We want that shit as our good stuff. And it's made most memorable by the beach scene, if you recall, where Jay is sitting kind of in an anti-feng shui, meaning her back is to the monster, or slash to the entrance of the beach head here. And we see a shot of her just drinking and sitting in a lawn chair, and they're all joking around. And slowly the monster approaches up the dune, and it's great dramatic irony because we know her friends who are pointed in that direction can't see, and the one person who can see has her back turned to the monster. And so at first it's a tiny body in an expansive shot, but as over time it gets close enough where it grabs her hair and the chase sequence begins. It's a perfect snapshot of what the DP is saying in this interview. I also want to point out that lensing and its relationship to distance. We have a wide angle film. We know this. So when you shoot wide, returning back to my kind of initial point about using limitations to foster creativity, it means sometimes that you're fighting against seeing too much. That's often the problem when using a really wide lens, like an 18 millimeter. You want your frame to look nice and composed like a postcard, but if you're on a wide lens, instead of zooming in or swapping to a longer lens, you can just move camera closer to the subject. Sometimes that has an adverse effect because people get that pinholing starts happening where people look distorted. So you can't really do it on close-up shots, but they do that a lot in this movie, I can tell, because you can tell that there's a lot of well-composed shots, but they needed to make sure that when they were dealing with like the middle distance, like most dialogue scenes, if they're using an 18 millimeter, they have to bring that lens real close to the actors for those dialogue scenes. And if you'll notice, it like, unless you're looking for it, like I know to look for it because I kind of pay attention to this stuff. And like, if you follow enough about like how lenses change images, you'll start to notice these things too in films. But you'll notice that people are more or less the same size in every shot. Like, because the filmmakers intentionally staged camera only a few feet away. Like they said, okay, every time we have a dialogue scene, the camera never gets this close and it never gets this far away. Now this up close and personal kind of positioning of camera relative to all of the dialogue scenes, even the scenes in the car, they had to like make sure that people all seemed the same size. It does basically two things. One, by making everyone the same size in the shot, you don't think about the lens choice.
Right.
So you as the audience, if everyone looks the same, it feels consistent. You never really think about it. But secondly, the background and the field of view of the camera, in other words, what you see on the edges of frame, is about the same when it cuts to another shot. Even though it's not the POV of the main character, you still feel this need to scan the background because now it's combining like terms. If all shots start to look similar in terms of the point of view, the point of view that we know is terrifying, i.e. the one that the movie has said, this is the point of view of like the movie. It looks like this. It's a wide shot of like an area, like a suburb or something like that. You unconsciously are going to start looking for the monster, even though it's not a shot where the monster would come up, because it's not the point of view.
You're on edge, baby. Yeah.
It's keeping you on edge. It's keeping you uncomfortable. And that's exactly what the director wants. I kind of wanted to point out one thing real quickly, because I try to keep, like, this is a little bit more technical than we usually get, but I think it's kind of interesting. Just because, like, when we're talking about this, I think there's an interesting aspect for aspiring directors and photographers. A lot of younger people new to direction focus a lot on what camera was it shot on? You get this question all the time when you go and, hear a lecture from like a director that or whatever, and they're like, did you shoot on the red? Was it Alexa? And I can't stress how unimportant this is. Until you're really making movies at like a Hollywood studio level, it's just really don't focus on that. A simple metaphor to remember. Let's say you're in a bike race, right? Your legs in this metaphor would be the emulsion or the sensor, like the camera. They are the engine propelling you to move forward, but the tires, the handlebars, the things that actually make you turn the bike, and like even why you're turning the bike in order to cut into the inside track or outmaneuver your opponents, that's your lens. So a camera is very important. You wouldn't want to release a theatrical film necessarily in 320 or 480p. You probably would want something closer to like a Tour de France, like racing bike, which would be the equivalent to a 4K or 8K camera. But your lens is getting you everything. Right. And people sometimes think that what camera you shot on matters, and it doesn't matter as much as you think. Now, what lens you shoot on does. Yep. If you're looking to become a visual storyteller, think in terms of what the tools get you, not in terms of what the quote unquote the best tool is. I want to bring up Clerks, El Mariachi, Following, which is Christopher Nolan's first film. We're all shot on 16 millimeter, which is like most films do not go to that's like a format for shorts. Most people sometimes forget that there's more or less what a camera is. It's basically just a method to capture images onto film or onto a digital medium like a sensor. A lens governs what you see. It's an overlooked and often important distinction. I just wanted to make
I might take it even further and say, if you want to be a visual storyteller, camera body is like way low on the priority list. But there are so many other tools that are at your creative disposal, if you're shooting on your iPhone even, that would make your film stand out ahead of the coolest shot thing on an Alexa. Like, we took a class from a professor named Bruce Block, who wrote a book called, I think it's The Visual Story. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
But essentially, most of the content that we cover in this podcast ends up sort of revolving around the basic concepts of what are the ways in which you can render an image in a frame and how can you manipulate those things, like colors and hue, or like space, deep, shallow, or negative space, right? Things that are like, these are the tools that are always present in a two-dimensional image that you're capturing on film. How can you use them to tell your story? If you learn that stuff and get good at that, doesn't matter what camera body you get, people will notice your film. I mean, it's as simple as that. And this guy gets that. This guy super gets that. Like, I don't think this is the sexiest package in the world at all. But man, he really understands how to frame stuff and how to introduce elements into the frame in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. He's so good at that.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway.
And I think that it comes down to kind of like what all of these tools that I've been talking about, kind of getting back to my thesis about this, about like identifying a motion or a movement or a timing. Your system is there to, like, it's a scaffolding to build a perfect moment.
Yep.
And you're trying to recreate that perfect moment time and time again in your film. And that's what gives it its uniqueness. That's what people go like, oh yeah, I remember watching that and I love that. Like, for example, we just talked about on Frame Rate Labyrinth. And like, when you go out and you talk to people about, because I've done it in like college and stuff, I'm like, why did you like Labyrinth? You know, like, what is it about Labyrinth? And I was just trying to get visually what people were talking about. And they would talk about like, do you ever notice like the glint of like the Labyrinth walls and everything's shiny? Like, there's something about that movie that, like, if you were to show me a picture of a wall, I would be like, that's Labyrinth. And there's no other movie it could be.
That's cool.
And I think that there's something about that. And this is what this film, I think, is doing with speed. If you've seen the movie, you could easily recreate the speed at which it is walking, like with your hands, or like you could recreate, like if I asked you, like if you've seen the movie, perform right now like the It monster in It Follows, you would know exactly how to walk. And I could do it. Because you've seen it, and they all are consistent, but that consistency is key. Because it develops that system of motion in this film. I mean, if films were suddenly moving quickly and then slowly without a discernible reason, you'd walk out of that movie thinking that movie's pacing was off. It felt slow or it felt fast. And I think it's because years and years of watching movies and TV has trained us as the audience to expect this kind of consistency. And when it's broken, we know it's intentional. That's why systems are systems.
Correct. And also, the systems train you for the way to get the emotions out of it. Like, I mean, that's really what he's doing. Like, this guy is constantly giving you the experience of walking toward the main character like you're that monster. Like, constantly doing that. Why? It trains you to feel when the monster's there. And it also trains you to expect the monster all the time. Even if you know while you're watching the shot, this is not the monster's point of view, it reinforces this is the monster, though. The monster's always here, always present, right? And, like, builds a system so that when the monster does show up, you're like, oh, God! Because you've been waiting for it. You're ready for it. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's this other thing I want to talk about, another tool trick about how sometimes things went too fast because of blocking or story reasons. And so he needed a way to go, okay, I don't want that because my system wants this speed to be the most pronounced speed in the movie. So if it goes too fast, I'm like, I don't like it. So how do you play that down? How do you make that not as exaggerated? Because fast motion is easy. It's very easy to make that exaggerated. It's very quick and sudden. It's, like I was saying, how a lot of modern horror, especially slasher movies, operate in the editing and whatnot. So I mentioned the slow methodical kind of approach of the sex demon and how the framing, which is a factor of lensing, is what the films are. This film is going for. The filmmakers are trying to make that this is the terrifying thing. So you have two things going on: camera pans slowly, monsters move slowly. And there's a phrase I like called in film analysis, they sometimes mention sympathetic motion.
You love this. You love this so much.
Yeah. So now How as a director might you approach the inevitable aspect of faster speeds when you're making your horror movie and you want that to slow down? Well, when a monster is upon you, it lurches forward, the victim runs away from it. There's speed in this film, but why didn't you focus on it? Or why did that slow speed that I'm talking about become the thing that you walked away from It Follows with in your head? I believe, based on looking at the shots, that this is due to, much like making the monster diminutive in frame, speed is made small in terms of visual real estate. When something is close to camera and moves quickly, that speed is exaggerated, especially on a wide-angle lens. It's exaggerated on frame because the distance you have to cover to move the entirety of frame, let's say left to right, is much shorter than if you were to back up from camera, like go way to the back, and try to cover the same horizontal real estate in the frame. But you're so far back now that you have to walk 30 feet or whatever. But if you're real close to camera, you only have to walk, move like a foot, and you cover the same distance because the conical structure of how field of view works. Less drastic your movements are. So if that's true, Mitchell, I think, and you can, the proof's in the pudding, just look at the film. Mitchell stages all of his quick movements in this middle distance to distance. Like I think of the pool scene when the monster's chucking irons at Jay and stuff.
Pretty far away. Yeah, it's pretty far away from camera.
It's far away.
Yeah.
And it's a small item.
Yep.
He's intentionally muting the speed of his subjects in frame.
Yep.
So this is why, at least photographically, you walk away from this film once again with this feeling of slow, meditative pacing.
Yeah.
And the last kind of thing I want to talk about is the editing, because the editing is also slow, and it also, I think, illuminates and kind of holds up everything that I've been saying so far. It's all about the system that he's trying to build. He's using his limitations for one purpose. And that is that all of this is consistent with the editorial strategy. Wide, empty frames, a slow subject and camera movement is also consistent in the editing and the music. In the music, he used this dronal 80s synth score. Is created by the artist Directorpiece. There's not a lot of melody in the score. The notes do not change much over time. They hang and they draw themselves out. Their attacks, sustains, and releases, which are all musical terms for the quality of the note, they're all lengthy. They have a slow kick in, they hang, and they fade out slowly instead of chirping up real quick, Yes,
the exact opposite of an 80s horror film.
So as far as the music goes...
Exact opposite of how it would be in an 80s horror film.
Right.
Or bling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's... It's that's the score of this movie. And I think at this point, I don't have to go into it. We all know why. In the edit, the rhythm and the pace of the movie is entirely constructed by one very effective trick in the editing. And that is that it's allowing motion to settle. So when you're at an edit bay and you have all the dailies in front of you and you see that the camera pans in your shot, you don't cut away until the camera has stopped moving in this movie. And even then, let it linger for a second or so. Then you cut. This is the pervasive editorial strategy for all the montages, all the the blocking and the actions made by the characters in just most normal scenes, the traveling sequences of the film where they're driving around and whatnot, and it's, not really a montage, but it's like a musical interlude.
Yeah.
Camera moves or pans or whatnot, and subjects move in camera, but their stops and their starts are entirely contained within the frame.
Which is weird.
That's
weird in a movie.
Cut in the middle of their walk. Yeah, it really is weird in a movie because you usually want the momentum of one cut to move to the next.
Like Nolan would do.
There's something called cutting on action, which is the seamlessness of a cut can be hidden and made more naturalistic if you cut in motion. He's denying us of that. He's editorially avoiding that. And the filmmakers have there's another, to show that, I guess, it's kind of the same trick, but it's, keep that trick in mind for the dialogue. If you watch the dialogue scenes in the movie, especially those with the friend circle, where once Jay has begun to be haunted by the monster. Notice when camera is on the person speaking and when it's not. You'll find that Mitchell consistently overlaps dialogue to the point of cutting entirely away from the person speaking for large swaths of the conversation. It'll cut to the reaction shot of who's listening. What this looks like, if you were to mute the sound of the movie and just look at it, there's so many sequences in this movie where it just looks like a bunch of people sitting around and not talking for the most part. This adds to the stillness of the frame, because even though their bodies are like paintings, they're not moving, their lips aren't even moving. Mitchell's so focused on sustaining this feeling of stillness in the film that he wants it to read like a graphic novel, where every cut is like its self-composed world, and then it moves on to the next, and then to the next. Still frames with the audio being essentially text boxes. So that's how he does it. That's how he did it. That's it. I think this is all designed. There's no drastic movement, no focal points in his compositions. He edits slow. He's got slow melodies in the audio. It's all to exaggerate dread and this kind of, and also I think he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. He's kind of spitting in the face of typical horror convention, though I can't really speak to like why he did that, but I noticed that like this is kind of an anti-horror movie in this way.
That's correct. It does feel like that.
Yeah, so other films use these slow approaches by the monster to great effect, but this film embodies the momentum of its monster in every discipline of its filmmaking. And that is how you use limitations to find your creativity. I give this movie 3 murder STDs out of 4. It's a great movie, it really man. And I love this kind of conversation or like, I know it's been one-ended so far, but like, or one-sided, but I love this kind of conversations. When I get excited, you can tell I'm excited about these movies because the strategy is so cohesive with what they're trying to do with the movie. And it's so seamless. You either like it or you don't like it. That's the beauty of it. If you don't like it, it's fine.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Yeah, you'll be fine.
But if you do like this kind of stuff, like he nails it. He's like, this is the type of movie I'm making.
I mean, I think it's interesting how this strategy, first of all, it is very cohesive and it's very noticeable, but like it still doesn't feel that loud. You know what I mean? Like, so you mentioned Birdman, which to me, Birdman is the epitome of a loud, stylistic set of limitations, right? Like, and one of the ways, sure. And I was going to mention it earlier, but I didn't want to slow your roll because you were just like an inevitable force of nature creeping in on truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you were doing. But you were mentioning like they stage the subjects pretty far from camera so that you don't get warping. You know, whereas like Birdman does not give a shit about warping.
No, they'll bring Michael Keaton into the camera.
You'll get right under his jawline, and he'll look like he's on almost in a fisheye lens, right, like a '90s rap video or something. It's very loud, right, and it's very cool, and it does serve a cool purpose. But this director is making bold decisions, but they're not attention seeking, and so you could still watch the movie and not sense the hand that guides you. You know, like, and I think that's a fascinating space for a director to occupy. Like, the older I get, the more I get excited about like the Sidney Lumets of the world, you know, or like the Billy Wilders, who are just very good, talented, thoughtful craftsmen who have a style, but also can set the style aside and tell something in a somewhat unique visual way because it belongs to that film. Like, to me, that's what directing really should be, is like, you know, hey, this film needs this. And so like, we're going to do this and like build a system that's interesting and specific. And our sense of auteur now, or our sense of what filmmakers do, is sort of crafted around the idea of the director has a style that they press on all films. And that doesn't produce this kind of work very often, I would say. Right?
No, this is a very like we're talking Carpenter versus Wes Anderson, you know?
Right.
Like we're
I
talking
like Wes Anderson. I mean, you hate him, and I get it.
But like he is definitely on one side of the camp. Like you were forming camps here, and you're right.
Yeah.
Like that Wes Anderson has a look over his career.
Well, Wes Anderson also has like Wes Anderson verges on style over substance. Like, you know, you might say
I wasn't even going to speak to that, but
you might say that he crosses that threshold altogether, and I don't think.
I mean, I would say that, but like I wasn't trying to.
No, you weren't.
I was just pointing out that like he has a look. He's trying to say, I have a voice. I'm going to make movies like this. Carpenter or someone like Mitchell here is like, I'm more involved with what's the movie. Like, what's the thing telling us?
Right.
Like, what? So when I choose loud things like visual strategies or sound strategies or musical sound beds or whatever, I'm going to do these kind of things that all play into one kind of focal structure. You know, I'm going to make sure it all is wrapped up in this one strategy. And that is different. Like they're both doing that. Wes Anderson is doing that too, but Wes Anderson is like it's between movies. Like I have a thing I do for all movies as opposed to a story dictates that this is how I make this movie.
I think Wes Anderson at this point, you're going to see the Wes Anderson film for his eccentricities and style. Like you're not even like you care about the story, and the story is what you will walk out with and be like, that was good or not. But you're watching the movie because like, oh my God, they're stamping library cards and like renting paintings and like sitting in 1x1 frames and like, you know, just the kind of shit he would do. Which I don't hate it. I like it. I mean, I don't think it's always good, but I do like it when it is good. But then you mentioned something like Rushmore. Right? Rushmore sort of predates this thing, or it felt like a more authentic version of this thing that he does. And I think there's a reason why that was such a launching pad for him, because that was a time where, number one, he pivoted in his style, as you just said. And number two, he pivoted to something that was actually important to that film and made it work. And so people were really excited about it. In the way that I think people were excited about this film, because it felt very like, wow, this is a really cool marriage of director choice and narrative. You know, like that's, for instance, why when I watch Tarantino films now, I find them exhausting. Not all of them, but many of them, because I feel like I'm just kind of watching the director get excited about the style stuff he wants to do. And then eventually I'll get narrative beats. And some people, they don't mind that. I do, though. Again, I'm getting older and I'm more interested in Sidney Lumet than Tarantino. You know? I know that's not, the most fun thing. I also...
no, it's... you don't have to...
Well, and like, for instance, I again, people know I teach in a film school. I would be surprised if 10% of the film students that I encounter could name Sidney Lumet, but they can all name Tarantino, right? Of course they can.
And I mean, that's recency bias, but also like,
I think it's also style bias too.
We make movies different. We make movies differently. Style matters more now.
Style is kind of how you...
Zack Snyder,
right? Like, I think now we've lapsed into the idea of brands so heavily as filmmakers that even making a choice like this in a horror movie, unless it's like so loud, like it doesn't guarantee you another shot at a thing, Yeah,
and even directors who are seem on surface transparent have their stylistic approaches. Cross films. Spielberg is a great example. He seems to... most shots in Spielberg, you're not like, that's a Spielberg shot. But then there's like a handful of shots every film that you're like, that is a Spielberg shot. That is... No one can do that shot other than Spielberg. Michael Bay's the same way.
Bay is a stronger sense of that. Like, I think Spielberg... I mean, we should talk about this sometime because we should find the right Spielberg movie to talk about this. I don't know which one it is. It's not Hook.
It's not Hook, apparently.
But Spielberg's, to me, his genius, aside from being able to be the guy who brings to life these important things that change cinema history, whether it's sharks or it's dinosaurs or it's the Holocaust or it's D-Day, that guy has done all of that, in a definitive way. But he's also so good at blocking plus camera movement. Like just sort of like having a shot that has two pieces and everything that gets you from piece 1 to piece 2 also tells story.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's really flooding you with story all the time. And he's got sort of a relentless optimism that I think we still kind of like. He's pretty optimistic as a filmmaker, which we...
His blocking is...
There's
like
for
one
camera.
way to do blocking in my head, and it's his way, which is not even his way. It's Kurosawa's way, which is not even Kurosawa's way. Right. It's all there's just the right answer because it's just like, oh yeah, it moves. But I was talking more of like low angle dollies.
Right, which is sort of staples of the cinematic diet now. But again, you just mentioned that Spielberg has like kind of a way that's the way. This guy didn't do it that way. I love that. I was really into it. I mean, also, I think that's part of why I like Kubrick. Because Kubrick basically refuses to do things like that. Yeah, he doesn't do stuff like that. And he takes way bigger chances, and sometimes they're profound, and sometimes they're like, what is this,
Yeah. I think Mitchell is gonna. There's more movies to like. This guy's good. Yeah, this guy knows what he's doing.
To me, he's like Robert Eggers, like just a filmmaker. I'm excited anytime I hear their name around a project. I'm like, oh yeah, baby, here we go. Right, like like Robert Eggers gets a free watch from me until he makes a bad movie. I love him so much. He's like Lynch. He's like a new Lynch. He's like the next Lynch. I love him. Absolutely love him.
I think someone said recently they were like, can I pay you to talk about the Lighthouse?
I would take money. Yes, I would take money to talk about that movie. I love that movie.
By the way, he was on the list for single lens movies
with The Witch, right?
Because he did The Witch, right? Yeah. I
mean, he's good, man. He's good. I think, funny enough, I think his strength might be writing. I think he's a great director, but I think he's got a really interesting like point of view script wise. But we're getting pretty far from this movie, and I don't want to do that so much. I think it says something that this movie still gets us excited after the first viewing, because a lot of horror movies are pretty disposable.
Yes.
And this movie just fucking lingers, man. Like it really does.
Yeah, it sticks with you. Right?
Yeah, and also rewatching it today, I was like just so pumped. I was like, man, this is great. There's just so few of those. Great job, director. What's his name again? Mitchell? Yeah. Is that correct? David Robert Mitchell.
Robert Mitchell.
Man, he's great. I need to check out more of his films.
Yeah, he has not done a lot. He made after this Under the Silver Lake.
I have not watched that, so I need to watch it.
Oh yeah, that one's good. But this was like his first big one. As a writer-director, he only had one film, which I haven't seen before It Follows, which is The Myth of the American Sleepover.
That's a weird title for a film. He kind of makes one every 4 years. But I kind of dig that. Like, because to me, every 4 years feels like, that's about the amount of time it takes to come up with a very good movie idea and, like, write it and have it get it's good and make it. Right? That feels right.
Yeah.
It takes...
But I think check out Under the Silver Lake. You might like it. It definitely, I don't know. Some people found it a lot. I like films that a lot of people think are too confusing. Like I liked Primer.
I like Primer too.
I don't think Under the Silver Lake is even Primer level. It's just it's got I could see why you would think that the script is like too much.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm not as judgmental about films that have genuine artistry as I am about films that don't. Like, I don't mind if a film's uneven or broken. That's why I didn't mind Book of Eli, right? We were talking about that movie, and like, I didn't mind Book of Eli because they did try something. You know, they were trying stuff, and like, that's enough for me to get on board and want to watch it. It's the movies where it feels kind of like a cynical project or just sort of lacking passion that really make me sad. Because I would give anything to have made that movie and fixed it. You know, like, that's what I want to do. So like, I hate seeing a movie that feels half loved. No way, man. Put all of yourself into it.
Did you also know that there is talks of making it follows as a possible sequel?
I don't hate it, but I need to know why I need to see it.
Well, because the end of the movie is open.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't get the monster.
Get it, right? That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but...
so it's not... They're just getting away, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so they've like, bought themselves some time, but it's gonna knock off a few people, and they're gonna, you know, like, they just spread the disease. They just smoke bombed. They just threw a smoke bomb. That's all it really is. It's still gonna come after.
Or they launched the Followverse, and we're just gonna get all kinds of tales in the Followverse, right?
Well, as I believe, because me and Michael saw it when it came out, and we talked about how we're such nerds. We're like, why the second that you know this premise, you gotta bring science into it, right? You gotta do shit like, okay, so every day for like a week, I am going to take a stopwatch and I'm gonna go to a football field, and I'm going to have it chase me, and I'm gonna time it, you know, and I'm gonna see if there's a consistency in the amount of time that it must walk. And then I'm going to do with larger and larger distances and see if that is true, to find out if my math is all right, and like and then move to a different, you know, place, and then see if that's still true. And then like put back the envelope until you find out what is the number. What is the number that is a reasonable number where you can be like, I am going to fly to Finland,
right,
and live for like 3 months, and then I'm gonna fly to Australia and live for 5 months, and I'm gonna, you know, and so you just have it so it's always walking in the Pacific Ocean, you know, and it's not hurting anybody, and one day it might catch up to you, but you're talking, I get years where I can not it's not killing anybody, and I can like go to sleep knowing that it's not gonna like come into my house. Life. Or you build a bunker, right? You know, like, there's many solves for this, you know, like, but you gotta have a strategy.
They were very devil may care with their approach to getting rid of it.
I think it's because we're dealing with teens,
well, that's
right?
why it
who
works.
are like, I mean, that's kind of the whole thing, is like, they're like, the world is crazy, sex is crazy. It makes you think too many things, and I'm ill-equipped to deal with it. That's what it's kind of trying to point out, is that there's a lot of scary shit, you know, when I don't think the movie's trying to say like, don't have sex, people. I think it's actually not trying to say anything about that. It's just a, you know, but if there is a metaphor, I mean, it is saying that there is like, it can appear scary to people.
I think it's just sort of winking at the whole genre of teen sex horror anyway. Just sort of like, you know, how this works, right? But
yeah, it's like, what the whole slasher world makes it so that if you have sex,
get punished,
you get
right? It's angel of justice. That's how it
yeah.
works, right?
Which is, you know, also silly.
I mean, that's a horror convention, though.
It's justification. It's a horror convention, and he's playing with it, yeah. But I think that I think some people, because of the amount of thought that went in this movie, started treating it with like a critical eye, like film criticism. Like, it's not just this movie bad. It was like, there's some like
there's substance
actual,
here,
like,
yes,
metaphor here, isn't there? And I think that's a testament to all the stuff that we've been saying.
It's also vague enough.
Like, there's interpretations.
It's vague enough that it allows for that too, right? Like, most horror movies are so concrete about what the actual monster is and why that it doesn't really invite much conversation. Once in a while you get, I mean, again, I think this is why The Lighthouse was so appealing, is that it was definitely not that way. Or, you know, like for instance, Saint Maud is a movie that just came out in limited release. And I think there was a little bit of vague room there. And so people are kind of interested in it. But this movie allows for a broader range of reads and meanings. And so I think people feel invited to that conversation because of it. And that in itself is unique, fair. You know? Also, I don't think people expected much out of the horror genre at all until like the last like 10 years in terms of meaning. Right? Like it very, very rarely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few like Rosemary's Baby and like The Exorcist and stuff and The Shining that kind of broke through. But
there's some King that does some stuff. But yeah, I know a thing or two about King. I'm finding that he has more metaphor than you'd expect out of even some of his sillier stories.
I heard. I happened to catch the Green Mile, King of Kings, where that subtext was definitely on full conversation blast.
Yeah. But you're right. Especially Jordan Peele really brought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Between Get Out and Us. I also think Black Mirror. There's a lot of recent like works that really are trying. I know Black Mirror is technically sci-fi.
It's still a horror,
but I think that it's horror. Sci-fi horror, I think, is fair for a lot of the episodes.
Get Out,
and there's something about making a social commentary while you're making your conventional horror film.
Yeah, and Get Out felt like the Rosetta Stone or something, or like a tidal wave of opportunity that came behind it. Because
and that's why he also did
it. You know what I mean? He's the guy that thought of it.
Yeah, and I think it was very smart. He got with CBS and started doing Twilight Zone, because I think that is something that Jordan Peele knew, is that he knew that he was like a Twilight Zone kid, I assume, because he likes it so much. It's his project. And he was like, I want to get back to the roots of like Rod Serling, where it's like these episodes that are, it's a horrifying implication of like a premise for some monster, or a horror premise for some magic or something like that is just for this episode. But it's really trying to reveal like, vanity is the real monster or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think people are a little bored I think they're certainly bored by the sort of Catholic parable version of horror. I understand that. And so now there's kind of a rise of like basically the same premise, but it's paganism. Like sort of old god horror is a thing that I'm hearing more and more.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of Norse shit.
Yeah. It's the same idea where it's like it's this moral system, but it's a different religious background. And I think that's again why Get Out is so interesting, because it's like sort of eschewing the traditional avenues for meaning and bringing one that was never considered part of horror. And that's just interesting, and hopefully we'll see more things like that. I'm
eager to see what this director makes. I'm
gonna watch these other two films I've seen. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, I think horror in the last 10 years at least is in a golden era. Like, really. I know the slasher film, you're not going to beat things like Friday the 13th and Halloween for posterity's sake. But I think horror is taken seriously now.
Yeah.
And that's...
Now it's a genre.
That's good. We still have bullshit like Wally's Wonderland. That just came out, and that's a piece of shit. But, like... We still have those movies that harken to the slasher genre and the age-old, like, what is a horror movie? But it's also transforming to a new thing where it's kind of what sci-fi occupied for many years, which is to think about society.
Horror is sort of like, sort of becoming like dramas in that there's a lot more freedom, but it has a built-in thing that dramas no longer have, which is people will be interested in it because the base mechanic of it, like the base emotional mechanic, is fear, escape, and death, right? Like that thing, that primal, like the monster's here, it's going to get me, is a more lucrative loop than like, man, the human condition. Am I right? You know what I mean? Like I wish that wasn't true as a person who loves dramas. I love them. But
look at this person.
Yeah,
look at them.
Aren't they a human?
Look.
Aren't they? Don't they bleed like you?
Yes. What a performance.
Right. We don't love that like we did. I mean, Hollywood still loves it, but the movie audience is less interested, sadly. Horror is slowly kind of positioning itself to be that genre now.
It's just asking itself to be taken serious. No one's going to stop taking drama seriously,
for sure.
Because dramas, it's not usurping anything. It's just like, good for horror.
Well, horror, you know? But again, good for horror. But again, like drama used to be a thing people showed up to theaters for. You know, and now it isn't, sadly. But horror still is. You know, that's what's interesting about it.
You know how they have those like people show like Friday the 13th, like these midnight showings where like people huck like popcorn at the screen.
Yes.
I want that shit to happen to like Get Out. Yeah, that's true. It's a system of racism. It's been entrenched in America since the beginning. Throwing shit at the screen.
That's a distant future.
I want there to be a mix of a distant future where people are like, yeah, let's treat all of our new horror films like we treated like the 70s horror films, where they're just like, you want to go see the picture where, I don't know, a bunch of teens die and there's like a monster who's like impossible to kill? Yeah.
Well, that's another.
I still like that
funny
stuff.
link though, like, you know, and I know we got to wrap it up, but a funny link.
I mean, that's it.
A funny link here is like actually Friday the 13th is the closest analog to It Follows. Like Jason as a character is not that different
because it started it.
Right. But like,
yeah, in a way, no. Like also Freddy Krueger,
but
also,
Jason in particular,
Michael Myers.
But Jason in particular is a slow, lumbering, like vengeful character who basically punishes people who have sex. Like not exclusively, but like that's one of the things he does. Like It Follows in some ways is like an evolution of that idea.
Sure,
and that's funny.
Yeah.
You know, that's a funny idea.
No, yeah, he it's like the OG. I mean, Michael Myers is the same thing. Those two. I wouldn't count Freddy, obviously, for
not Freddy.
The reasons you just said.
Not Freddy.
But if we're focusing on the slow lumbering kind of impossible to kill monster, absolutely. That's what It Follows is. Kill a bunch of teens.
that's all. That's what people want to see.
That's what we're watching.
What people want to see. Kill
that's
them
what people
teens.
want to see.
Kill them. Kill them dead.
And people have sex in this movie. People have sex in It Follows. Yeah. It isn't like Friday the 13th where it's just like, all the teens with the titty out. You know, it's like, no, it's not
exploitative.
It's not done.
Yeah.
That's the other thing about this movie is it's not exploitative. It's not like the sex is like, ooh, yeah.
The nudity is a bummer.
It's actually
the
kind of.
The nudity in it is a bummer.
It's bummer. Almost all of it is
pretty
a bummer.
Much all of it.
Because people have like wounds and like people are for the most part clothed because it's people are having sex because they have to. They feel like it's a thing that has to be done ritualistically. Yes. Yeah, it's a chore as opposed to I'm doing it because like I'm drunk and we're teens.
Well done, sir. You brought the house down. I love it. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
I like this movie, and I want to talk about more. I thought this movie would be like a little too much. I think this one's a little art housey for this podcast.
I don't agree. I thought this was right on.
Maybe we're gonna open it up.
I thought this was right on. I thought this is like perfect movie to talk about on this podcast. I was like thrilled that you picked it.
Right on.
Great, well done.
Thank you, sir.
So, hey, we love you, audience. Hopefully, you'll be back next time when we talk about another movie that you love and how it was crafted. You know? That's what we do.
Don't have sex or you'll die!
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!